Good morning, everyone. Obviously, we are doing a little bit of a different format this morning, but I welcome all of your feedback. Welcome back to our Tehillim class, our weekly opportunity to study the timeless messages of David HaMelech and inspire us all, both in our davening and our relationship with Hashem and our ability to connect with Him. Today, we are studying chapter 41 of Tehillim, Mem Aleph. This chapter is a fascinating chapter. Again, not one that's so familiar, although there will be some lines that will be familiar to us. Let's just talk about the basic overview and the basic structure. It's broken up into three major points. On the one hand, you have the introduction, which is the first pasuk. Then you have psukim 2 through 4. It talks about how Hashem supports the sick. 6 through 11 or 5 through 11 is the enemies of the sick person, a person who is sick, and how their enemies come and prepare to attack them. 12 through 13 is our trust in Hashem, that Hashem will hear our tefillos. And then finally, we have the conclusion at the end, again, which is a very powerful conclusion. Now, one of the things you'll notice about this chapter is it is the concluding chapter of the first book of Tehillim. While we think of Tehillim as one large book, it's actually divided up into 5 sub-books. In this parak, Mem Aleph, is the conclusion of the first book of Tehillim. You'll remember that the very first chapter of Sefer Tehillim starts with none other than the word Ashrei. Of course, our parak, after you get through the introductory pasuk, also begins with the word Ashrei. So there's a beautiful symmetry to that, and hopefully we'll discuss that as our class goes along as well. So we are in chapter 41 of Tehillim Lamnatzeach Mizmor LeDavid. This is the Psalm of David. Again, already in the next parak, we're going to get to other authors. We're going to start discussing the Bnei Korach. But here we are on Lamnatzeach Mizmor LeDavid. Ashrei Maskil Eldal Biyom Ra'ah Yimalteu Adonai. Praiseworthy or happy is the one, Maskil El Dal, who is thoughtful about the person who is lowly, the lowly person, Biyom Ra'ah Yimaltehu Adonai, that on a day of when bad things happen to this person, Hashem will protect him, Hashem will keep that person from harm. Now, automatically, right off the bat, you are wondering, who is this Dal? Who is this person? You'll also notice that as we continue in these psukim, we're clearly talking about a chola. So, for example, in Pasuk Gimel, Adonai yishmereu v'chayehu, that Hashem will guard this person, Hashem will preserve this person, v'yi'ushar or v'ushar ba'aretz, v'al titneu b'nefesh oivav. Hashem is going to protect this person. He is going to guard this person so that this person can be yi'ushar, so that he can be, says Mitzudas David, Hakol Yomru Ashrav, so that everyone can praise this person. V'altidneu b'nefesh oivav, and he cannot be subjected to his enemies. Pasuk Daled, Adonai Yisadenu al Eres Davai. Hashem will uphold him, Hashem will sustain him when he is on his sick bed. Kol mishkavo hafachta bechalyo. And Hashem will transform his bed of suffering. Again, Hashem will essentially overturn whatever illness is facing this person. Ani amarti Adonai chaneni. I say, Hashem, you should have mercy on me. Rifa'ah nafshi ki chatasi lach. Hashem, I have sinned against you. Please grant me that refuah shlema. So again, off the bat, you need to wonder, who is this sick person? What exactly are we talking about? And in addition to that, you're going to have to reconcile the beginning of this parak with the next part of the parak, which talks not about a sick person, but rather about the sick person's enemies. So what I want to do is I want to read through the entire parak and then come back and glean out some of the lessons that we can learn along the way. So again, we are on Pasuk Vav. Up until now, it's all been about the sick person. Clearly, right, it's Ashrei Maskil El Dal, someone who pays attention to that person who is downtrodden. Hashem Yishmareu V'chayehu, Hashem, you should guard me, you should preserve me. You should overturn my sickbed. Ani amarti Adonai chaneni refa nafshi. Hashem, and you should give me a refuah shlema. Why do I want the refuah shlema? Pasuk Vav. Oivai yomru rali. Because my enemies are speaking evil against me. Matai yamus va'avad shmo. And what are my enemies waiting for? When is this person going to die? When are they going to perish? V'im ba liros shavi daber libo. Yikbatz avenlo yetze lachutz yidaber. And even when they come to visit me, what do? They speak falsely in front of me. And the second that they leave, then they start telling the truth. Mitzudas David over here says, Ukashir ba mi mehem liros bi ulavakreni hayimader midaber imishav. That when they used to come and visit me, When they did Bikur Cholim, so to my face, they said how much they wanted a refuah shlema. Ki befiv yinachem osi, with their mouths, they tried to comfort me. But ubelibo hayemekafetz divrei aven va'amal uksheyatza lechutz el chaverav. But the second he would leave my hospital bed, hu medaber ha'avon asher kabetz belibo, he would reveal what's really in his heart, namely that he can't wait for me to depart. He can't wait for me to pass away. Really horrible thing. Pasuk Zion. I did Zion. Pasuk Ches. Yachad alai yislachashu kol sonai. Right, they gathered together and they whisper about me. Yachshavu ra'ali, and they plot. They imagine the worst about me. Davar blial yatsuk bo. My enemies are plotting against me. Ve'ashir shachav lo yosif lakum. And what are they saying? They're saying that guy has no future. Right? Lo yosif lakum. He ain't getting out of that. He's not having a refuah shlema. Gam ish shlomi. And what about those who I trusted? Those who were not my enemies, but I thought were my friends. Asher batachti bo, who I put my trust in. Ochel lachmi, and we broke bread together. I shared my bread with them. Higdil alai akev. Akev, again, literally means an ankle, but here it means, say the Mefarshim, that they're ambushing me. And even the people that I thought were my friends, they too are plotting against me. And therefore, ve'ata Adonai chaneni, va'akimeni va'ashalma lahem. Hashem, have mercy on me. Hashem, let me rise up, va'ashalma lahem, and therefore I can repay them. In other words, essentially, that which they plotted against me, I should be able to pay back against them. And if you do that, if you save me, Hashem, bizos yadati ki chafatzta bi, then I will know that you are pleased with me. Then I will know that you desire me. Ki lo yaria oivai li, because my enemies will not have been able to triumph over me. Va'ani, and what about me? Pasuk Yud Gimel, bitumi tamachta bi. In my purity, you will have supported me. We have to understand what that word bitumi means, right? The Metzudas David says, Ba'avir, shalachti ami bitmimus. The fact that I walked with that tamimus with you, tamachta bi, that is what allowed you to support you. That is why you supported me. Vatatziveni lefanecha leolam. And you made me upright in front of you forever. Rabbi Goldberg spoke beautifully on Shabbos about this word bitumi, tamimus, that Sfiras Omer has to be a time of tamimus, that it has to be a time of tamim. What does tamim mean? Rabbi Goldberg spoke beautifully in the name of Rav Avram Shor, that to be tamim means to put your faith in Hashem even in the most difficult situations. That the time of Sfira is us to put our amun in Hashem, to recognize that He is in charge, to let go and to let Hashem be in charge of our lives. That fits beautifully in this pasuk. Ve'ani betumi tamachtabi. Right? What should give you the reason to save me? It's that I always walked with faith with you. Even in my most difficult, challenging times, Hashem, ve'ani betumi tamachtabi. I put my faith in you. And lastly, the very last pasuk of the first section of Tehillim, Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael me'olam ve'ad olam, Amen ve'amen, which, without even understanding the pasuk, seems very clearly to be a punctuation of a chapter. In other words, end quote, period, exclamation point, however you want to end that section. So that's the chapter of Tehillim. There are two very different ways of understanding this chapter of Tehillim that I want to explore with you. Option number one is the Das Mikra. The Das Mikra is bothered by the following conundrum, which is that the beginning, the first 5 psukim, are all about a sick person, and then the rest of it essentially is about being saved from enemies. What does being sick have to do with being saved from enemies? We have Prakim and Tehillim that talk about being sick, and yet the entire parak is devoted to Hashem, I'm sick, help me out, get me out of this. For example, chapter 30 that we say every single morning, right, where we say, Miyor Divor, that I'm like in a pit, and we say, Chaneni Hashem, take me out of that. But in our parak, 41, what does that have to do with our enemies? What's the connection between the first section of this chapter of Tehillim and the second section? So the Das Mikra says, you're right. For the average person, being sick and having enemies are two different things. There's no connection to them whatsoever. But for a king, they're one and the same. Because if a king is sick, it becomes a political issue as well. Your enemies are now going to come out of the woodwork and they're going to plot against you. Just think for a second, again, in our contemporary society. Let's say, chas v'shalom, but a dignitary, a president, a prime minister would all of a sudden get very sick, right? So the enemies of that person are now going to sniff weakness. They're going to question the person's ability to lead, and they're therefore going to call into question all of that person's decisions. So when a leader is sick, the enemies in the sickness go hand in hand. It becomes a political liability for the king because his enemies are now going to plot against him, saying, okay, the king is sick. That means the king is vulnerable. That means maybe we can accomplish certain things we weren't able to do if there was a powerful king. So says the Das Mikra, the two sections go hand in hand because for David HaMelech, they were one and the same. His illness is what gave room to his enemies to now come and to plot against him. Who then, says the Das Mikra, is the Maskil Eldal? Who is the person who is paying attention to the poor person? Right, Pasuk Bet. Ashrei Maskil Eldal. David HaMelech is saying, praiseworthy is the one who pays attention to the poor person, the indigent. In other words, the person who's going through a difficult situation. Says the Das Mikra, that is the loyal citizen. That's the loyal citizen. In other words, the person in the country, the citizen of the king, who is loyal to the king even when the king was lying sick in bed, that, says David HaMelech, is Ashrei Maskil Eldal, who didn't utilize this as an opportunity to plot against the king, to create a coup, to try to take away power. Said David HaMelech that anyone who is loyal to the king during his difficulty, Ashrei Maskil Eldal, that person should be praiseworthy. That is the Das Mikra's understanding of our chapter in Tehillim, and what precipitates it is trying to reconcile the two halves of the chapter of Tehillim. Chazal understand this in a very different way. For Chazal, this chapter of Tehillim is talking about someone who's sick, and specifically it's what happens when you visit a sick person in an attempt to alleviate their illness. So for example, Rashi says, Eldal, Chole Levakro. We're talking about a sick person, and specifically we're talking about when you come to visit the sick person. Bikur Cholim. What's biyom ra'ah in Pasuk 2, says the Rashi, Ze Gehenim. Right? In other words, Ashrei Maskil Eldal biyom ra'ah, when the person passes from this earth and they're contemplating the fragility of life, so that's their yom ra'ah. It causes us to shudder when we question the fragility of life. Says Rashi, Mascharo, what about in this world? Right? Okay, so in Olam Haba, you get reward for visiting the sick person. What about in this world? So that, says Rashi, is the next pasuk. Hashem yishmareu v'chayehu. Who are we talking about? Who should Hashem protect? Who should Hashem repay? Says Rashi, Lemi shemevakro umetiv lo. We're talking about the person who does bikur cholim. That the person who should be rewarded is the maskil eldal. It's the person who visited the sick person. The Radak over here says that this is actually what the visitor says to the cholim when he does bikur cholim. It's an amazing Radak. Quoting his father, V'adoni avi, perish, ki kol eila hapsukim, heim divrei hamevaker lenachem hachole. This entire chapter of Tehillim is nechama. It's comfort, it's chizuk that we give to the chola, to the sick person. And what's the chizuk that we give to the sick person? Yomar lo shelo yifached me'acholi, that he should not be afraid of his illness. V'yischazek b'libo ki biyom ra'ah yimalteu Hashem. The chizuk that we give to him is that on the day that he's sick, that when he's going through this difficulty, that Hashem should support him in this world and the next world, which also reminds me, again, I want to thank our sponsors for this class, and for Refuah Shlema, for my cousin, Rafal Aaron HaKohen ben Rivka, by his aunts and uncles. Thank you very much for your generous sponsorship. And more than that, our learning should be for Refuah Shlema, Bekarov, Bimheira, Biyamenu. So says the Radak, that's what this chapter is about. This chapter is the chizuk that we give to a sick person. I'm sorry, that the visitor gives to the sick person as he visits them, right? L'na'achem ha'chola, to comfort the chola. Shelo yifached me'acholi, that he shouldn't be afraid of his illness. V'yitchazek b'libo, to give him encouragement in his heart. Ki biyom hara'ah yimalteu Hashem, that whatever happens to him, this world, next world, whatever the circumstances might be, right? It doesn't make it easier, but that's what it means to be a person of faith, is that we believe in Olam Haba, that we believe in a system of reward and punishment, that we believe tzaddik hatamar yifrach, that even in other worlds, the tzaddik is going to flourish and prosper. Says the Radak, this is the chizuk that we give to a chola. The Medrash says this explicitly. When the Medrash says, Amar Rav Yochanan, kol mi shemevaker cholim, that anyone who does bikur cholim, ma'avirin mimenu echad mishishim b'chol yav, you reduce, you take away 1/60th of the illness. This is the Medrash on our pasuk. Says the Medrash, and if you have the opportunity to do bikur cholim and you don't do that bikur cholim, so you compound the person's illness. That is the Medrash on our pasuk, and that is how Chazal understand this chapter. So whereas the Das Mikra understands it in terms of the king, that for the king, an illness is a political liability. Just remember, again, I don't know if you remember in one of the elections when Hillary Clinton, I think she fainted or she looked like she was going to faint. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but the other party jumped on that and said, you see, she's not fit to lead. You see, she can't be the president, right? So for a leader, illness becomes a political liability. That is how the Das Mikra reads this. In the Maskil Dal, the person who pays attention to the sick person, that is the loyal citizen. The Medrash Chazal understand this in a very different way, that this is Bikur Cholim. This is the chizuk that we give to a chola, that it's our obligation to be Mavakar Cholim, that it describes our reward in this world and our reward in the next world as well. One of the things that I think is interesting is that it doesn't say Ashrei, right? If you were talking about what we've described, you wouldn't necessarily use the word maskil. What word would you have used? You would have used maybe chonein, right? Someone who is merciful towards the sick person. I find interesting that it uses the word maskil. Maskil means to pay attention. And I think there's a profound lesson in that, which is that when we conduct ourselves in interpersonal relationships, when we have a friend that's going through a challenging time, when we do Bikur Cholim and we're never sure what to do and how to do it, right? Maskil. Sometimes it's as simple as paying attention, right? Opening up your eyes and saying, what does this friend need right now? Do they need a text message or do they need dinner? Do they need someone to take a walk with them or do they need help with carpool? Oftentimes we superimpose how we want to do chesed on another person, right? This person is going through difficult. Let me impose to make myself feel better. Maskil el dal means that I'm going to pay attention to how I do it, that I'm going to do it with mindfulness, that I'm going to do it because it's the right thing to do. So I'm going to pay attention to not just what will make me feel better, but to ultimately what the person who is in need actually is in need of. Rabbi Goldberg and I did a Zoom call with the boys and girls who are living in Israel, who are in Israel studying for the year, to give them chizuk and to process the horrific events of Meron from last week. And this topic came up. The students were wondering, how do we know what to do? And how do we do it in a way that we're not overbearing, but that we show the friend that we're there for them who's going through a difficult time? This is maskil el dal. Maskil means to pay attention to it, that it's not a cookie cutter formula for how you're going to visit a sick person. One person might need one thing, another person might need another thing. It's not a cookie cutter formula to when a person's going through a difficult time. Some people might need help with carpools. Some people might need help with meals. Some people might need the text message. Some people might want to talk about it. Some people might not want to talk about it and just want to know that you're there for them. Everyone is going to need something different. To be a good friend means maskil el dal, to pay attention to it, to put thought into it, to not just do things that make you feel better, but to do things that are necessary for your friend and for what your friend actually needs. Two final ideas that I want to share with you. One is the entire system or the structure of Ashrei as starting off and Ashrei as ending off. So I saw this idea, which I think is beautiful, which is the first parak Tehillim when we say Ashrei hagever, right? Ashrei ha'ish, Asher lo halach be'atzas r'shaim. Praiseworthy is the person that doesn't follow the wicked. What does he do instead? Ki'im b'toras Hashem chefzo u'b'soraso yegeh yomam v'layla. What does the person do? He doesn't follow the wicked. He doesn't follow the scornful, but rather he indulges himself in the Torah of Hashem. First parak Tehillim is about Torah. The last parak of this section also starts with the word Ashrei, but it has nothing to do with Torah. What does it have to do with? It has to do with chesed. What a great symmetry to the first book of Tehillim. Starts off with Torah, ends off with Chesed, which, if you think about it, are really our two elements of our avodas Hashem, of our service to Hashem. It's our obligations bein Adam l'makom, our obligations towards Hashem, and it's our obligation bein Adam l'chavero. That is what makes us a complete and whole Jew. To just do one without the other is incomplete, right? There are some Jews who think that all they have to do is Torah Jews, that they can mistreat people, but, I make minyan and I dress a certain way. But, when it comes to the way I treat other people, I don't have to be so careful. There are other Jews that are careful about bein Adam l'chavero. They're kind. They walk the lady across the street. They do all the nice things. But I'm not a Torah Jew. I don't study. I'm not the text studier. I'm not the mitzvos follower, right? Ashrei and Ashrei tells us that we have to be both, right? Ashrei Aish, Kim Besaras Hashem Chev. We have to follow the Torah, and Ashrei over here, where you're Maskil El Dal. That is what makes us a full and complete Jew. The other thing I'll mention is the word Ashrei. Because we are coming to the conclusion of this first section of Tehillim, it's important to remember what Rav Hirsch says, that at the beginning of Ashrei Ha'ish, Rav Hirsch says Ashrei does not mean praiseworthy, right? Rather, on the other hand, what does it say? Let me just find exactly where I want to quote, right? This would indicate as the true meaning of Ashrei, not the possession of faculties or material goods attained, right? It's not about how much money I have and the size of my house, in my car, but rather he says that the word Ashrei comes from the word Ishur, which means a step. Ashrei means progress towards eventual attainment of such material and spiritual wealth. It is a striving forward. Ashrei does not mean that I accumulate. What is the source of happiness, says Rav Hirsch? It's when I feel like I'm progressing. It's when I feel like I'm accomplishing. It's when I feel like I'm doing something, when I feel like I'm productive. Oftentimes you'll speak to someone who's in a state of depression, either clinically or just anecdotally, and they'll say, I just feel so unproductive. I feel so useless. I feel like I'm not contributing anything. Ashrei is when you and I are going forward, when we're progressing, when we're accomplishing things. No matter what stage of life we find ourselves in, we should always be in a state of Ashrei, not happiness, but what leads to the happiness is that I'm accomplishing, that I'm achieving, that I'm always seeking to do good and accomplish more, whether it's in my Torah or whether it's in the way I treat other people. Someone who is always progressing, someone who is always accomplishing, that is Ashrei. And the last idea I want to share with you is magnificent, beyond magnificent. And it comes from the Likutei Maharan. It comes from the Breslover Rav, from Nachman of Breslov. He writes here the following. And again, this is an idea that comes up in Hasidic thought oftentimes, but they call it the Mochin de Katnus and the Mochin de Gadlus, which essentially means there are times in life where we feel like a katan, there are times where I feel small, and there are times in life when I feel like a gato, when I feel like I can conquer the world, right? We call it the undulation of life. Some days you get up and you feel like you can conquer the world. You wake up in the morning, you're productive, you're accomplishing, you got the smile on your face, the skip in your step. There are days when you wake up and it's just not clicking and you're going through the motions and you're trying to put one foot in front of the other, but it's just not, you're not feeling it. You're not feeling that connection to Hashem. You're not feeling that connection to other people. You're not feeling that connection to yourself. You don't feel like the best version of yourself. Says Rav Nachman, how do you overcome those moments of katnas? How do you overcome those days where you don't feel Ashrei, where you don't feel like you're accomplishing and you don't feel like you're progressing and you feel down about yourself? Says Rav Nachman of Breslov, the most amazing idea. V'im lo yachol ba'atzmo lavo legadlos hamochin. If on your own you can't inspire yourself, if by learning and by davening you're just still not feeling connected, eitza lazeh. My advice to you, says Rav Nachman, sheyaskil acherim. Turn the focus away from yourself and pay attention to other people. And by putting your focus on helping another person, that is what will inspire you. That is what will arouse within you the inspiration that you were looking for and that you were craving. And so says Rav Nachman, I'm going to build upon it. The first parak of Tehillim, Ashrei Aish Kim Besaras Hashem Chavtzo, is if you're looking for inspiration, turn to the Torah. Delve into the Torah. Seek a relationship with Hashem. Seek a connection with Hashem. Use that to inspire you and to elevate you and to become that best version of yourself. And then we come to chapter 41 of Tehillim. Ashrei Maskil El Dal, says David HaMelech, if that doesn't work, if you're unable to inspire yourself on your own, if you're struggling for inspiration, then here's my advice. Close the Gemara, get out of your seat, and go help another person. Do good for another person. I can tell you, even before having seen this comment of Rav Nachman, that this has worked for me in my personal life countless times. There are days I sit and I'm just not, it's not working, right? I'm going through the motions, I'm doing what I have to do. It's just not working. And I find that on those days, if I turn my attention away from what I have to do and turn it towards helping another person, text message, a phone call, a visit, whatever the case might be, when I do that, it gives me a chiyus. It gives me a sense of life again. That, says Rav Nachman, is Ashrei Maskil El Dal. So I think this is a very powerful chapter of Tehillim to reflect upon how we relate to each other, how we relate to people going through difficult times, how we relate to someone who is sick, the chizuk that we give them, how we can't just look at it from our own perspective, but we have to look at it from their perspective, maskil. You have to actually give thought to it. And this last beautiful idea from Rav Nachman about inspiring ourselves. Sometimes we look for inspiration and we struggle. The answer, says Rav Nachman, is to focus on other people, to focus your efforts on chesed, to focus your efforts on people in need. And by seeing how lacking they are, it'll make you feel so appreciative about yourself. It'll make you feel so good about yourself. The more you give, the more you get. That, says Rav Nachman, is Ashrei Maskil El Dal. That's chapter 41 of Tehillim. Again, not a very popular chapter, but I think a very powerful chapter about Emunah and Hashem in some very dark and difficult times, something that is relevant to all of us. Again, our learning this morning should be for Refuah Shlema, for my cousin Rafal Aaron HaKohen ben Rivka, that everything we learned today we should apply in our own lives in terms of helping other people and in elevating those who are feeling downtrodden. And by doing that, the more we give to other people, the more we will be able to inspire ourselves. I want to wish everyone a beautiful day.